Are your people working hard but not reaching their full potential? The problem is not effort, it is development. At the Modern Observer Group, we transform workforce development into real performance. Our human-centered achievement programs help your team think better, communicate stronger, and execute at a higher level. That means higher employee engagement, stronger leadership, and measurable results across your organization. If you want a workforce that performs, leads, and delivers, it is time to invest in your people. Visit modernobserver.com and discover how the Modern Observer Group helps you build a workforce that wins.
We are lighting the candle, a world that works. Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Correll, and I am here once again and in this blessed space that I like to call Time with Jan. My good friend Jan Jeremias and I have been at this for quite a long time. We're up close to, I don't know, almost 250 episodes at this point, which is pretty cool. That either says we've got some interesting things to talk about, Jan, or we just like hanging out with each other every so often.
Yeah. I think that, we just like hanging out with each other, and hopefully we share something that people find inspiring along the way. But yeah.
Well, there's this old saw that my mother used to call tonic for the soul. That was before Chicken Soup series came out. She said, she was a Nebraska farm girl, and her mom always talked about the things that got her back to being able to feel normal and feel right. Okay. And the tonic for the soul in many instances was laughter. In other instances, it might be a hug, or in other instances, it might just be a out of nowhere, I love you, or something like that. And just a warm feeling being exchanged between human beings. But it's the neat thing, it's as if interrupting the sameness in what you and I were talking about. And maybe you want to say a few words about that, but, out in the braving the wilderness. And what does that seem like? Except for when you're not,
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you're not, you go through life. I don't know. I think when I think of when I'm not disconnected, it's kind of like I'm there, but I'm not really there.
Right.
I don't take in my surroundings. I'm in them, but I'm not part of them. The other thing that comes to mind is I think of, I guess the certain words come to my mind. Unconscious. You used the word when we were just chatting of being asleep. And I'm not talking about when we're physically asleep. Talking about being in the world and navigating the world and not taking in whatever's around you. And that could be the people that are in your immediate proximity. It could be, to me, this element of appreciation for what's there, what's outside and in, and also what's outside and in. So meaning, where am I today, and what am I feeling, and what's going on, and all the good, bad, the ugly, like, what's present. And to me, that's braving, that's being brave and obviously courageous enough sometimes to actually look at that stuff.
Yeah.
And then not push it aside and kind of poo-poo it or ignore it or distract myself from it.
All of which are referencing it, as opposed to nothing and being present.
That's right. And so I think of that, to me, is Because what do you get for it? That's, I used the word earlier in a conversation I was having with my small group of dear friends. And I said, when you do that, whether it be with people or like taking in everything, there is a richness, like there's a depth to it. And I used the word richness because I felt like that was very apropos. Like
Yeah.
there is a richness because it has nothing to do with obviously monetary richness. It has everything to do with the richness of life.
The sensory richness of,
Richness
and
of
then that kind of bouncing off of your understanding of what those senses are telling you versus what those senses are actually doing,
Mhm.
the
And
richness is all in that in between, and
mhm.
a lot of it is in the silent spot, where there's nothing.
That's right. And so I think I liked that, I was happy I used that choice of word because because I really was thinking about that idea of, all the different people that I know that I'm really close with that are from different backgrounds and different, and how it creates, it's like having a dish and making like adding spices to it,
Yeah.
like, or adding some sort of flavoring because it adds depth. It's like adding salt to a sweet thing that makes the sweet even more intense. I think that there's this richness that happens.
Yeah. I actually think, that that's one of the defining differences for writers who have stood the test of times, the classics. If you take the time to really read the words, the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer stands on its own as a work that is, um, it actually defines and develops a whole journey and all of the interesting things that can happen while relying very heavily on wordplay, you know. And if you think about what was a little bit different and unique about the way that Shakespeare spoke, I doubt there were a lot of people in his time that actually spoke the way he wrote. You know, you know, behold, what whatever yonder breaks.
Hmm.
And you picture two guys, one of them with a ham hock in his hand and a glass of ale in the other hand, going, "Alas, I could use a napkin to wipe my face," or something like that. But the point is that the way that literature is constructed creates a relationship with the reader and the author. And the author does what you and I are doing, and that's the creation side of it. This is where we put something out into the world, and sooner or later, someone happens on it or gets referred to. Hey, you ought to listen to this particular podcast because they're wackos. They think they can do something about empowerment, and maybe it would be useful and helpful for you, if not in all, but at least maybe in part, maybe once in a while.
And I think that you're using, you're talking about authors or whatever, let's say just label it creators. Um, that I think sometimes it doesn't even have to be a whole conversation. I think it's just one word that triggers an idea or a thought in you
Yes.
or a question that someone asks or an idea and just and sometimes it's something you knew, but the way they phrase it, all of a sudden you look at it very new again.
Yep.
And I think that that's what the gift is. It's not necessarily the entire conversation, because people's attention spans are not that long. So it could be, we use the word wilderness, or we use the word brave or courage, or we talk about richness, and somebody says, "Oh, like richness," and you kind of mull over in your mind or in your heart, like, what does that word kind of bring up for me? Like, what do I think about that one word? And that's, to me, that's where it all begins.
So I like what you're saying in the context of a group conversation, especially where there's an opportunity to let it land and then get some sort of a ping response to what did you get? What did you get? People's feelings about what they heard. And the responsibility of an author is to speak into a void. There's no one there. Like the sound is going to travel at some speed, and sooner or later it's going to land somewhere. So the magic is being able to communicate presence. They're creating presence to what's coming off of the printed page. They're building a world for you to live in, a few paragraphs at a time, such that you find yourself either very interested in it or you're trying to figure out what the hell it is that they're saying. And you and I have read both authors, that there were people that were so interested in sounding like they had aggrandized ideas that were really worth listening to and worth spending lots of money, to hear him speak in public. And then there were other people that had these little short, thin books that when you got finished reading it with tears running down the side of your face, you thought to yourself, that person gets it. That person really knows, how I'm feeling right now. And if you can communicate that to a variety of people from different walks of life, what you've actually been able to do is to communicate at a very visceral and sensory level, which to me is where all the power in life is,
Yeah, I think it's interesting when, we're talking about reading, and I know that, well, for the audience, maybe not every, if we have new listeners, maybe they don't know, but I love poetry, and there are certain poets who have the ability to really do that very quickly for me.
Yeah.
They really seem to like speak, to me, it's just such a gift, like to be able to read someone and think like, oh my gosh, they totally get what I'm feeling right now.
Right.
And I think sometimes you get that because poetry is really, music is just poetry put to music, really. And so I think music will do that for people. I think art is a great way. Like sometimes visually somebody can capture a feeling or an idea that's, beyond, let's say, not beyond it's almost, I love realistic things, but sometimes you'll see an abstract or something like that, which totally creates a feeling of of something without necessarily the object themselves.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of a sculpture I saw in Florida when I was visiting my parents once. And it was just like this wing and the way it was positioned. And I think it was called Flight. And it was huge. And I thought to myself, it had such a feeling of movement and of flight without being the whole bird and without being like it was just a part of a wing. I mean, it was amazing. And I thought, it was just created that side. Like I could feel it. Like I feel the energy of it. I could imagine what it would be like to fly. And it was, so I think that, that's where all the arts are really wonderful, I want to say, at describing the human condition.
I agree with you. Have you been to the Louvre?
Mm-hmm.
I would say for me, that was sensory overload. Having the Winged Victory of Samothrace, having in of all places, a stairwell, marble stairwell, but it was isolated by itself, which was really great. And then having the Mona Lisa, which is not a hell of a lot bigger than your laptop turned on end. It's
Mm-hmm.
for all the fuss and everything. It's not a huge presence. And then you walk into some of these halls and it's just an endless 15, 18, 25 foot tall masterpieces depicting some dead nobleman, out doing heroic deeds, in Roman gear or some kind of stuff like that. And I thought to myself, we're not doing this justice. We're walking through 1,000-foot long room, looking at hundreds of different pieces of artwork. And really, it's not much more than getting sand thrown in your face. It's like that. You get to feel something, but not take the amount of time that really some of these things really deserve. So we were very fortunate to go back to the Mona Lisa. They had it on a little pedestal kind of a thing, like a pedestal wall that was out in the middle of this large area with a lot of people that could normally be there. And as usual, walking through there, I started a conversation with one of the docents, and she said, "You people are so fortunate." And I said, "Well, why is that?" And she said, "Normally, you can't get within 50 feet of the Mona Lisa. There are just so
Mhm.
many people, and it's so iconic. It's one of those things like the Beatles. Everybody around the world knows what the Mona Lisa is.
Mhm.
So we were able to go over and stand unimpeded, with nothing between me and the Mona Lisa. Of course, it was roped off a little bit. And I stood there and I just kept looking at it and I thought to myself, what's more special about this painting than some of the things that I've seen my peers do in art classes in high school? That was the question that came up for me.
Mhm.
I wasn't completely moved by it. I was more moved by the story and the enigma of who is this woman actually to Leonardo, and how many of these did he actually paint, and how many of his um, trainees painted very similar pictures that have been discovered over the years as well. And the history of things that I had learned about, what went on between Leonardo da Vinci and his benefactors.
Mhm.
And as I was sitting there just looking at the painting, I thought to myself, a lot of this stuff was just showing off for rich people.
I, when you were talking, Bill, one of the things that came to mind for me was, yeah, I think you start to learn a lot about history as it was portrayed through art or whatever, is the fact, like you said, who was the patron? Like when you look at you look at the Dutch masters who, or a lot of the old where you know, the cloth was really exaggerated and the folds were really
Yeah.
dramatic and very rich and beautiful. And, it's like you could feel the velvet kind of thing, and realize that most of their patrons were all um, cloth merchants.
Yes.
And so you kind of understood um, why they were, why that was exaggerated, or why that was concentrated on in
Right.
those in those paintings. And I think that you learn so much about a people and about the artist. And I think that that's when you look at the Mona Lisa, for example, that's what you kind of do. You're like, who was this woman to him, and who was this woman, and what was he trying to say beyond the painting, almost, also, and as a person, as a painter. And I think that when you read poetry, or you listen to a piece of music, it's always so interesting to hear the background and to hear the history behind whatever the song was, or the musician who wrote it
Yes.
was. I always felt that way after I would, like, having with poetry, having listened to, recordings now of Mary Oliver or Maya Angelou interviews and things like that, John O'Donohue, and where you and you hear from them what their life experiences were like, what their lives were like, um, what they were speaking to when they wrote,
Right.
beyond what you feel. Um, because I think then that brings into mind, to me, a connection, and the connection is to the person, like listening to, a piece of music and feeling connected to the musician or to the composer. I think there's a connection that happens then.
Right. Yeah. Every time you say a sentence, a whole lot of everything washes right over me. The neat part of music is having been exposed to as many different types of musicians and groups and orchestras, philharmonics, you name it. And right, I've never been to St. Louis to listen to jazz, but I have been to New Orleans to listen to jazz back in the day, seeing the Preservation Hall jazz guys and Pete Fountain and a guy who his name was Al Hurt, was quite a trumpet player back in the day. The remarkable thing about all of it is there's a different relationship I noticed for me when I think I know some facts about somebody. And for instance, Da Vinci was an artist maybe like 1/18 of his time, which is why there are so few paintings by Da Vinci. Okay. Where Michelangelo was not this inventor, author, engineer, physicist. That was Da Vinci. Da Vinci was the original Renaissance man that covered every beach possible.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was, Michelangelo got himself, hooked up with the Medicis, and the Medicis were very, very Christian and very, icon oriented. So of course they'd want to have a David. Of course they would want to have a Pietà. They would want to have the Sistine Chapel. They don't want to. Most of his stuff did not have to do with designing buildings. The rich people of the day would come to Da Vinci and say, "I've got a problem. I would like to fly. How would you solve that for me?" So then you've got these sketchbooks that are filled with all of these different drawings, with wings that would emulate what a bird has, and then he'd come into problems like the weight ratio, to what goes on underneath the wing, and then he have this kind of an egg-shaped thing that had a helix, going, like all these things. Like, how would I solve this problem? But the engineer's mind was always looking to improve the idea. And so I was watching a program about 2 weeks ago where they have a current group of engineers from either, I don't remember which college it was. It might have been Cornell or maybe it could even have been one of the California engineering schools that are trying to build a flying vehicle that Da Vinci sketched out, in the 1500s. And the neat part of that is they actually got the damn thing to fly. He never built it. It was all completely conceptual. They had different materials to use than he would have had during his time. But that to me is art speaking to generations later, people who not only got it, but were so infected by the idea. They said, "Wow, I love this. Let's go see if we can make it real, make it happen." So to see the Mona Lisa that size and not on a grander scale, it kind of put into perspective for me how important it was to him. There wasn't a big benefactor paying him tons of money to do something that would be splashy that they could show off to their rich friends.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a huge Da Vinci person because I always love the fact that, I actually, I was studied, my major was science, but my minor was art.
Yeah.
So I always felt very much like I identified with this person who was, had lived thousands of years before, who actually almost found the commonality in art and science, and that there was some sort of, merging of the two. Not to say that I could paint anything like Da Vinci, or I could I was on the same caliber of science as he was, but still, I did identify with him to some extent. But I think that, the other thing to me, the common things I look like, he was able to find beauty in both. Like he could look at the fact that somebody would come to him and like the whole idea of flight and find a beauty in that, like trying to figure it out and
Yes.
find a beauty in there and the physics of it, but also look at a person and be able to find the beauty or art and be able to look at the beauty in that
Yeah.
and to be able to transfer that into something. So that's really where it wasn't so one dimensional. Like there was a common dimension to both.
Yeah. I love what you're saying. If you take some of the impressionists like Chagall, if you've ever been in the opera house, in Paris, Chagall did this 150-foot ceiling, and it was in cubism, which, like, in Paris, there'd never been anything done like that before. It was very impressionistic. And there were a lot of suggestions of different things, including angels and what have you. It's remarkable in terms of the color combinations. But I don't believe that he ever designed a ship that could carry 300 people, or designed a home that could be floated in Venice, that no matter what happened with the water, it would always go up and down and maintain the level that you needed to walk out the front door, onto the wooden streets, right? So when you think about the people that were great architects, or like a Frank Lloyd Wright.
I was just thinking of Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yeah, and he was a problem solver also. And so it's on my to-do list for this summer. It's been closed for a few years, but Falling Water, it's over in Pennsylvania,
Mm-hmm.
out in the middle of nowhere, from what I've been told. But here's the situation where he's got this amazing natural setting with this beautiful, beautiful little tiny river, or large brook, and the water gets diverted as a result of coming into contact with the house. But how do you make the house now become part of it? Not like it's dominated nature and nature will now do its will, but no, it's integrated with nature, and it's a natural place for this place to be, both in dimensions, and it's what it looks like, and even what the sounds are like, the water sounds, that it's all maintained. And what you have, for me, knowing a little bit about it and how they trucked in tons of concrete. They had to build a bridge that the concrete trucks could not back over. So it was wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow after thousands of them. Okay. And then there's all the rest of the stuff in terms of wanting the natural light, to fill the rooms, as opposed to being reliant on inside electric lights. So I can't wait to go and see it. I'm going to have to restudy up on it again so I can look for some of the fine points that I know I would miss. But when I was building a business 40 years ago, I saw this picture in person, and it was actually a drawing of the Illinois. Frank Lloyd Wright had actually gone to the powers that be, at a big meeting in Chicago, and proposed building a a structure in the middle of Chicago to commemorate, I think, the 150th anniversary of the founding of Chicago, or whatever it was. And it was to be called the Illinois, and it was to be exactly 5,280 feet above the ground. And they looked at him like he had four eyes.
Mm-hmm.
The tallest buildings in Chicago at that time, when he was proposing this, were probably somewhere on the order of, 350, 400 feet. Those were tall buildings. So they would have to have designed from scratch. This is his mind working. He's going to make this problematic such that they'd have to design whole new technologies for the elevators, because there was nothing that would operate beyond X number of feet. And so there'd have to be, all these things would have to be taken into consideration. The type of glass that was being used at the present time would not be sufficient. It would have to be a brand new way to manufacture glass just for this building. For some reason, they turned him down. But if you can imagine having a mile-high building, and I don't know, what are we looking at? Like the current World Exchange building that took the place of the Twin Towers. I think it's somewhere around 1,700 feet, if I remember correctly. Well, this is a ridiculous thought. But if you can think that big, what other kinds of things can you kind of chunk down into it that are more doable?
Mm-hmm.
And what are the listeners going to do with that kind of thought?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm a huge, and I've been to his, went to Frank Lloyd Wright's building in Arizona because he has one in Scottsdale. I've also always wanted to go to the one in Pennsylvania, and I've never made it there to Falling Water. I've always, because I love his work. I'm reminded also of the sculptor, and I don't know if you've ever heard of Chihuly.
Yeah.
Who does glass work that is just like huge. I mean, these pieces which are just spectacular, which I've seen a number of his exhibits, the spheres and the colors, and just like also what you might think like the kind of thing which requires so much thoughtfulness and so much engineering and so much insight, but yet so much, like we're talking beauty. And I remember one of the best, I've been to a few where I went to the one at the New York Botanical Gardens, I remember, which was just like to see them in natural settings, which is almost so contrary to what it might, because it's glass and it's bright, and how it almost adds to, it doesn't almost, it adds to their beauty.
Yeah.
And so, things to me like that are, when we started the conversation talking about richness. I mean, that to me is richness. There's something about adding it in, which you might not consider like an eyesore, which is going to add only, it's the contrast of it, which makes it even more beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of richness in terms of like a way to communicate that to people is what we call flavor layering in cooking.
Mm-hmm.
When you put something in your mouth, there's like this symphony of different, not only textures, but flavors, that you can taste, maybe 7, 8, 9 different, ingredients that are in there, just from one bite. And it's a little bit different than going and getting a McDonald's hamburger, but when cooking takes on the form of communicating the thought and the love that goes into designing how a dish is going to taste, as much as how it's going to look, I really enjoy that as well, and that's kind of one of my special hobbies that I play with every single day. I'm not really on purpose about how I plate things at this point. I was for a while. I was really getting into, some pretty neat color combinations and different types of things to just kind of augment and supplement what it looked like, that would also enhance the taste and the digestibility. But when you start talking about how glass makes you feel, and the sense of size and all of those sorts of things, these are those visceral, nonverbal things that I was talking about before that are all sensory.
Mm-hmm.
Hearing about it or having somebody, do a discussion or a narrative about it, it's just not the same thing as experiencing it.
I mean, it's interesting that you say that, because I think that that's part of the reason I've always loved to travel. And I think that because there's nothing like, and I think it is very true when you talk about reading is something. I mean, I think it's very different to read a recipe versus obviously taste one. I mean, it's like me reading about an essential oil blend that contains certain flowers, and or it contains different plants, flowers, and herbs, and basically the experience of smelling it,
Right.
which is very different. And when you were describing a dish, I think of certain blends like that. It's to be able to, and that's why, perfumers are very, are expert at, scent combinations. And a really good one, you'll be able to smell. Like when you smell it, you get like, it's like having a bite of food. You get to smell each element of the plant or
Yes.
whatever they've added in. You might smell the jasmine, or you'll smell the patchouli, or you smell the woods, like all of a sudden you'll get a hint of a wood smell or a citrus, and and it's something that is
Yeah,
experienced and felt. And when you say experienced, it's something that's felt.
exactly.
Taps into one of the senses. So you taste it, you smell it, you see it, you know, it creates a sensory experience.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're saying that because and I know we've mentioned it several times, but now I'm also recalling the the conversation about a felt sense, which is a physical shift in your body, the kind that you get when you first experience balance on a bicycle or rhythmic breathing, to the point where once these things are part of you, if you don't do it for 30 years, you can go back and you can do it again in a few minutes. And when I think about some of the things that have really affected me and stayed with me, whether it's going to the Alaska uh, coastline and taking a helicopter up to the top of these glaciers and looking at the literally thousands of mountain peaks going off into the horizon in every direction and thinking, wow. I asked the guy who was piloting the helicopter if they all had names. He said, no, they don't have names. They have numbers. He said, so if you want to name one, knock yourself out. Go ahead and do it.
Yeah, I've been to places like that, where the mountain ranges when I was in Switzerland, or when I was in the Northern Cascades, where basically all you see is one peak after another, glacier territory, not Alaska. Um, I've also been to beaches that are like that,
Yeah.
that are just, as you look out and all you see is, water, or maybe shifts or colors or whatever,
Yeah.
and colors that are um, not, not even like, you know, which the most brilliant artist would have to work to create, like, I mean, it's not colors you see anymore. I found the same thing when I was hiking in the northern Cascades, that from the glacier melt, you get the water melt, and it's like this deep green or deep blue that you don't like. It's just in the middle of this stark whiteness, or stark like white, and everything, which is just amazing.
Well, if you're of a certain age, you can remember when Ice Blue Aquavelva, you know, and it was named and it was colored for that indigo that it's indescribable. I mean, once you've seen it, you know what it is for the rest of your life. But it's just so dense that only the longer low waves in the blue spectrum, will reflect off of it. So it looks really deep blue. We're dancing around a hole. I mean, this hole was probably 6 or 7 feet across, and our the captain of the helicopter is getting kind of close to the hole, and I'm going, "Hey, buddy, this would not be cool for you to fall down in that hole. The rest of us would be stuck up here on top of this glacier. If one of us goes, it's a bad thing, but if you go, the rest of us are pretty much screwed. So he laughed and he calmed down and stepped back away from the hole a little bit. But it's kind of neat. You look down into this thing. It looks like the inside of a funnel, And then he says this goes down about 1 to 2 miles, where it sort of empties into the river down below, which then empties into the delta and out to sea. But when you were there, were you there when the Mendenhall Glacier was still a big thing that you could see from out to sea?
I don't recall. No.
Well, it rose from sea level to 1.5 miles, right straight up. This glacier was unbelievable. After we get off, I'll send you, I'll find it and send you a picture of it. But you could see it from so many miles away. And it was just like it was almost like a monument, if you will. Kind of a unique place for a glacier just to show up and be that large.
The other thing that it reminds me of is like I remember when I went to Volcanoes National Park, and they and I mean the volcano's always oozing, and so when you walk, you're walking on hardened lava, and they sort of gate off how close you can get to, because it's kind of seeping up, like you don't want to, but how hot it is, and it comes up through the sole, like no matter what shoes you were, like it comes up through the soles of your feet, kind of thing, and then it kind of wanders off to the edge of the cliff, and and you can see the steam rise from the ocean because it drops off and it goes into the ocean. And so I just remember like standing there on this hardened lava, and there's nothing like the feeling of that hot coming through your feet, and you think to yourself, like, it's okay, I really don't need to get any closer than I am right now.
Wow.
So, yeah, I really, it's, okay. I think I had there's some things where you, like, those are experiences which are truly, inspiring, awe-provoking.
It's a remarkable thing to just go and visit. I'm in the process right now of putting together a hit list of maybe a dozen different places that Jan and I can go on, rather than going on a big cruise or a big expensive vacation somewhere, where we could just spend a week or two and just drive around New England and go see things we've never heard of before. What's really nice about that, there's no airfare, no long trips here and there,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimate control over, every day's meals. So, here we are, over halfway through April. That went by in a flash.
Mm-hmm.
I've been feeling like I'm such a fortunate, lucky man. Whatever's going on in my life, I really do feel like we've got this. And I don't have any justification for feeling that way. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
However, I am going to say that my center of gravity is much larger than myself. My center of gravity is in my community, which makes it much harder for me to feel isolated, alone, and, at the mercy of, if you will. I really do feel like, yeah, I got some stuff I got to do, and it's going to go how it's going to go. But at the same time, I feel cared for. I feel loved enough. I feel great connections with many wonderful human beings like yourself. You're at the top of the list, by the way.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But the neat part of it is we don't have to be in the middle of each other's stuff to be real important to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I spend a fair amount of time appreciating that and being really grateful and thankful, that that people and I are this way for each other, if you will.
Yeah, and it's interesting, kind of connects to what I was talking about this morning earlier, um, with the fact that, I think you can say this, and I think that I can say this, especially since the post-COVID realm. I have a lot of really what I would call dear friends who are of vastly different backgrounds, vastly different. And that comes from socioeconomic to religious, um, to um, ethnicity, parts of the, globally, which I have to gift COVID. The true like reason is COVID and getting more online in that way, with people from different parts of the world. And I was thinking to myself, like, I have a richness of, and that's where it came in, a richness of people that I'm surrounded with
Yeah.
that are cool, um, have really great values, um, you know, treasure, like, you know, treasure human beings that I feel like truly blessed. Like I sit there and I think to myself, I I love that because I feel like there is a richness to that, which I don't know that I would have ever really looked at. And then recently I realized that richness.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're describing. And the fact that, I think I could reach out to any of them and, if I was having a hard time and, just needed someone to talk to. And the gift of having people all over the world is it could be different times of the day. Like I can wake up in the middle of the night and it's only afternoon there, or only morning.
That's that's fun in and of itself, isn't it?
But I thought about that this morning, especially, and I was thinking yesterday after some experiences yesterday and thought to myself, like, that's really like to me, that is such, I mean, in some ways, I think it makes it harder. In some ways, I think, yeah, I shouldn't say harder. I think it reveals to you, if you talk about that wilderness inside, is I think it reveals to you how they're like one dimensional, how we can only see one, like, ourselves, or, our own country. We can look at all of what we do is affecting people far beyond our borders, whether that be, physical borders or just the people who are different than us.
Yeah. It's interesting. Our distinction of different from us.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I mean, to me, there is no distinction.
I'm with you on that score.
Yeah.
There's
So,
things I don't know about people, and I'm looking forward to understand. There's cultural differences, but I do know that there are people who live like the whole world is different than they are. So I appreciate how you contextualized it. The difference on many cases is just what gets them excited. It's like some nights I'll go to bed and I'll holler, out the front door, Ozzy, 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 get your butt out of bed. To my buddy Kieran Isles down there, who's editor of a paper, a little small town, outside of Sydney. And he was the first one to teach me that cheer.
funny.
Now you got a mind full of your Australian friends now, don't you?
Mm-hmm. No, but I'm just like, I think that, you know, the reason you look at it, like you said, there might be things you don't know, but then there's so much that is the same between everyone. And I think you start to look at people in that sameness, as opposed to looking at, it's interesting to learn and it's fun and exciting. I find it really interesting to learn about different people and where they're from and the cultures and and the customs and the different things, like that kind of thing, based on, myriads of background and location and things. But basically everybody is really the same.
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing you say is evoking something inside of me where a lot of people get through life thinking they know what they're looking at before having ever said hello to a person they don't know. Where they size people up based on what the clothes that they're wearing, the hairstyle, whatever, as opposed to embarking and like leaping off of a springboard from a question. Now, I wonder what amazing impact you're going to have on my life. I can't wait to hear all about you. It
Mhm.
contextualizes meeting new people a little bit differently.
No, it totally does. It yeah, no, it brings, yeah, I think that when you talk about that, I love the way you phrase that, Bill, because I think that what comes to mind is like that when you meet somebody, like you really do, it's kind of like you're looking at them and you're like, I don't know, I think of you look at them with like attentiveness and interest and curiosity. And you look beneath the surface. You're looking for something beneath the surface.
Yep. Yeah, I will never forget the first time I heard that cheer. It was in a drinking establishment, and the person who's leading the cheer goes, "Aussie, Aussie, Aussie!" Everybody puts their beer in the air and goes, "Oi, oi, oi!" Which sounds more German than anything else, but it's an Aussie tradition, kind of a tribal cheer. And I think once you know it and once you hear it, the grin on your face is a good representation of how I feel doing it.
Mhm, mhm.
So here we are. We made it successfully through April Fool's Day, and we're coming up fast on Cinco de Mayo, which is really, I mean, about 2.5 weeks away ish. And are you looking at anything in particular that you're building this summer or want to see happen over the next couple of months?
Um, I'm also looking at maybe trying to take some time away in between work. Um, I have different thoughts in my head. As originally, I was going to plan a trip that was quite far, and now I'm not quite sure I want to do that at the moment.
Right.
So I'm even looking at stuff. I agree with you, like locally, um, that I could go. Um, so that's one thing. Yeah, I don't know. I'm always doing different work things. Um, and that's always, different, exciting, challenging. But I think that that's what comes to mind for now.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be a function of requests made by your community, by folks that you're in conversation with.
Yeah. I mean, I have to, concur, I'll have a few things that are on for work, and then and I am going to one trip I am going to make probably is I'm going to meet with Mary Jane for the first time. We've never met in person.
Wow.
And we're really working on trying to plan something for me to go. And so that's one thing I'm definitely, after basically working together 3 years and basically online multiple times a week and making each other laugh like all the time. I feel like, yeah, we were both talking about it. We were both like, okay, we got to do it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Do you think you'd go to Canada?
Yeah, I would go. I don't think she's going to come here. So I think I'm going to go to Canada.
That could be a nice trip too. I'm trying to remember. Did she say she was outside of Toronto or outside of Montreal?
She's outside of Toronto.
Yeah. Okay. It's been now almost 2 years since she and I had our long conversations, if you will.
Wow. Yeah, she's outside of Toronto. So, and then we have another friend who we do quite a little bit of collaborating with who lives a few hours from Toronto. So, probably getting to see her and kind of thing. So, yeah, so I would really like to do that. So that will give me a different flavor.
I think that's wonderful. I would love to go back there. The last time we went to Toronto was 20 some years ago. My older daughter was with us. We went through Kingston and we spent a night there. And that's a beautiful city that's on a hillside, that kind of goes down to Lake Erie. Absolutely gorgeous. And then over to Toronto and on Yonge Street and Toronto or Ontario Place and all of those good things. And then out to this, what used to be a little tiny burg called Mississauga. I mean, I say that going back 1960s. The first time we ever went through Mississauga, I don't believe it had more than 50 or 60,000 for population. It's bigger, I think, now than Toronto actually is. It's like over 1 million people. It's crazy. It got to be this big, huge manufacturing hub. And so the reason we went there was to visit a company that was one of my vendors that did all of our ergonomic furniture and seating for us. We had a ball.
Yeah, I haven't been in a while myself, but I think, I've been to Canada a few times, but I went to the West Coast. So I was in Vancouver, Victoria, Banff, those areas. So I haven't been to the more eastern part of Canada in a long time.
Yeah. Well, I will give myself away. The last time that I was in Canada that I can recall, that was the last time, but the time before that, I used to take a train that was called the Montrealer that came through Willimantic. And I got on board at 3 a.m. in the morning. And I went up there and I went to, a quarterly training program for a year and just had an absolute ball. One time the train pulls in and the snow, without exaggeration, is piled up 7 feet in the air everywhere. I mean, it was literally to the point where you could not see the facades of the buildings because there was so much snow. And this is one more little thing. At that time, the red light district was highly regulated and legal. They've done away with that over the last 10 or 15 years or so. But I think the Montrealers some were proud. Some were like, yeah, of course it's here,
Montreal's a nice city.
It's a gorgeous city, especially the cathedral, Notre Dame.
Yeah, but just in general, it has a very has that that old feeling to it, and so it's very, very pretty city.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I've enjoyed our getting together today.
Good to see you, Bill. Been a few weeks.
Absolutely. So in the meantime, any summary thoughts or any last parting words of wisdom?
Mm, Oh goodness, we covered like we were kind of global today. um, any last thoughts? Yeah, I guess, maybe choose one thing that we said today, one word, one thought, and just see where it takes you.
I like that.
Yeah, see where it takes you.
Well, I'm going to pull a word out, and it's going to be community. And I'm going to ask you, do you have any thoughts or any requests that you'd like to make of our community?
Yeah. So yeah, I think I'll grab another word out of our conversation today, and I will say, put on your bravery hat and go out and reach someone and just check in with them. See how they're doing.
That is absolutely beautiful, my friend. Thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for your friendship more than anything.
Well, thank you, Bill.
And to all the rest of you, I will say this. We know sometimes things are good and we know sometimes things are not that good. But at the same time, you get to choose when they're good and you get to choose how long you're going to stay in the zone where they're not that good. So my thought for you is go out and live your best life and then come back and tell us about it. We are lighting the candle, a world that works. We love you all madly and we wish you the best lives possible. Bye-bye for now, especially you, my good friend.
Bye-bye, everybody.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Lighting the Candle, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.